Okay, sure. Okay. All right, we'll call the strategic planning workshop for Tuesday, June 9th to order. Please silence your cell phones. And Sharon, if you would call the roll, please.
Mayor Owen.
Here.
Vice Mayor Colodi.
Here.
Commissioner Hartman.
Here.
Commissioner McGurk.
Here.
Commissioner Sachs.
Here. All right, first item is, actually we're going to do a couple of introductions. The commission just met a few new folks and wanted to introduce them to kind of the general public, a few new team members. Colin, do you want to do the introduction?
Yes, our two newest directors. Our finance director is Natalia Eckroth. Natalia, welcome.
Yeah.
And then our newest HR director is Heather Kidd. Natalia came in from the city of Daytona. And then also Heather came in from the city of Ormond. So we have a bunch of cities in this room. So
excellent. So
looking forward to work with these ladies.
So if you just each want to give a 10-minute speech about yourself and your strategic, no, I'm just kidding. All right. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for joining the team. We look forward to working with you. Next item, public participation. 3-minute time limit. Any members of the public wish to speak? That's just for, if I'd ask you, just for anything on the strategic planning. We've got another meeting after this. Save comments for anything on that or just general city business to that meeting. Any public comments for this evening's strategic planning workshop? Seeing none, we'll close public participation and get right into it. Colin.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Back in December, the commission had a workshop for the strategic plan.
Can y'all hear Colin?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, just eat that mic.
Okay. We had our commission workshop back in December of 2019 for the strategic plan. We have GEI, who I was consultant on this plan. We had a whole day workshop. Some of the commission wanted to see the strategic plan later on before the budget. So with the COVID, it kind of put us off a little bit, but we have Pete Seckler with us today. We had several meetings between Pete, Michelle, Brian, and I to finalize this product that's what you have today before you. Pete is going to go over the report, and then Michelle is going to go over the condensed strategic plan. Also, she was very successful in finding a software of how we track this strategic plan. So she's going to give you an example after Pete gives you the report. So with Pete, go ahead, please.
Great.
Okay.
Great to take the face mask off.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So do you have the report? Can you pull it up for the screens? Do we have it, or?
We'll get it in a minute. We all have it in our agenda package, but
okay. So and I presume it'll be online at some point.
Will be. Yep.
It's so what I'm going to do, because I know we want to have some discussion. I'm just going to give you the kind of the high points of what the process was and what the outcomes were. What we did in December was facilitate a conversation with the community, with the department staff leaders, and with each of you as commissioners about sort of high-level strategic objectives that are of common interest to the community. So I think to set the stage for this properly, this was really above the altitude of sort of the day-to-day business requirements of running New Smyrna Beach as a government. These were really sort of the higher altitude kind of altruistic and forward-looking objectives of the city and what really carries sort of the ethos of New Smyrna Beach. And the way that we did the work was pretty condensed in the sense that we did a number of things, one right after the other, over the course of about 3 weeks. And I think what was good about that was that it created some continuity in what we were hearing from the community, what we were hearing from the department heads and from you all. So over the course of about a week, we held 2 public meetings over in the Brandon Center We had individual one-on-one meetings with the commission, including the mayor and the vice mayor. And then we also had kind of an extended workshop roundtable session with the department heads. So I think to kind of set the table, there was kind of this focused series of interactions with different cohorts of the community to kind of talk about, what makes New Smyrna, great, and what are the things, again, sort of above the level of day-to-day government that we should be thinking about strategically. And so I've got some documentation in the report that kind of, if you flip to the next page, you can just flip through a couple of these pages. I'm not going to dwell on the pages because they're hard to read on the screen. If you're in the room, it's kind of a distant thing here. But what we did is we asked questions of you all in different ways. And so, for instance, in the public meetings, we had an interactive map where people could provide comments on the map. We had games like, if you had a certain number of New Smyrna Beach dollar bills, how would you spend them? Questions about community values, questions about how you want to get information. What we were trying to do is we were trying to get different ways of people to provide input, because sometimes when you answer a question one way and then maybe the question gets posed in a little different manner, you provide a little bit different information, and it makes the input that we receive a little more three-dimensional. And that was very helpful to us. And the other thing that we got sort of through that was, again, sort of SWOT exercises and discussion with you all, again, to kind of add dimension to what some of the key topics were. Another key piece of community input that we got came through a written letter from the New Smyrna Beach Residents Coalition that really provided, I think, kind of some high-level thoughts about just integrity, accountability, communication within the city, and teamwork. I've stood at this podium before and I've said that, this is a community of choice. A lot of the challenges and things that we discuss and debate in New Smyrna Beach are challenges of success. And it's really about managing success and doing that in a productive and constructive manner. And also being able to take on some of the difficult challenges that we have and being able to take those things on head on in a way that's constructive and inclusive and respectful of each other and moving towards answers that are usable. So the coalition had, I think, a really good vision statement, which I'm going to read. New Smyrna Beach is an inclusive community. I think inclusive community is an important word. We're business and residents. I think that's another important concept. Work in joint stewardship. That's another very important, I think stewardship is an important word. To sustain, it's an important word. There's some very carefully chosen words in this statement, in this vision statement. We're a unique coastal lifestyle, natural resource, and cultural vibrance for generations to come. So, being inclusive of the entire community, including the businesses and the residents, all members of the community, east and west, and thinking about how we're going to be good stewards of what we have here in New Smyrna Beach. And then the mission statement that New Smyrna Beach will provide leadership to achieve the vision in a professional and fiscally responsible manner in order to preserve quality of life and enhance value where we live, work, play, and conduct business. So I think aspirationally, we're really trying to say, we want to constructively and positively, recognize different perspectives, the different viewpoints of a diverse community, and over time, address the subjects that are before us in ways that are beneficial. I'll cut straight to what I think kind of boiled to the top in terms of synthesis, and so I'm now on page 6 of the report. There were really, I think, kind of 5 big topical areas that really came out of all the work. Go ahead and go to the next. Yeah, I'm not going to get into all that minutia. People can read the report for some of that. Go forward if you can on the screen.
Probably.
The other, yeah, keep going. Keep going. And go down. There you go. Keep going. Okay. So I think there were really 5 big topical areas that I think everybody agrees that we have the opportunity to do a better job at and continue to move the community forward over the next period of time. And these really become the framework, I think, for this strategic discussion. And again, I want to reiterate that the altitude of this is above sort of the day-to-day business of running the government. But I think that these, when you think about these topics a little more deeply, they begin to sort of color how some of those day-to-day conversations maybe should be conducted, and maybe the lens through which you should look at those day-to-day things. So one is communication. 2 is quality of life, and it's kind of hard to put your finger on what quality of life is, but we've attempted to do that. A 3rd is growth management. The natural environment and public open space that we have, and then transportation and circulation. And I want to take a moment and just read kind of the top line thoughts on these, and then I'm going to get to some of the drill down, and I'll pass it over to Michelle, because I think Michelle and the city staff have put together a really effective tool for you to actually deal with the drill down kind of starter ideas and actions that you can take for each of these 5 things. So on communication and trust, I think that we can talk about the past, or we can talk about what happened whenever at some point in history and who was involved or whatever. I don't think any of that stuff particularly matters going forward. I think what's important is going forward. And we have a great group here, and we had great participation in the public meetings that we had. And I think what's important to keep our eyes and ears on is a mission statement that says something like, New Smyrna Beach will be a community of trust, transparency, inclusion, respect, so that potential opportunities and complex issues can be discussed in a thoughtful and balanced way for the future of the city. And I think the discussion that we have under that is we have to recognize that in New Smyrna Beach, on virtually any topic that we want to raise, there are going to be trade-offs. And we don't want to position things in win-lose types of scenarios, but there are a lot of competing interests, and we need to be searching through open communication, through inclusive communication. We need to be searching for things that can mutually reconcile issues as best as possible, recognize different points of view, and come to conclusions that have broad contribution to the ideas and respectful buy-in to the outcomes, and that we're doing that in a way that where voices are heard and there isn't a sense of preconceived notions or preconceived outcomes. And so what that means is that single-minded viewpoints often do not adequately represent the true interconnection of environmental, economic, social, and cultural factors at hand. The objective of the community, city staff, and commission is to set a fair and constructive platform to discuss the shared future. So, we've got a lot of interest groups in New Smyrna Beach. We want people that want economic development. We want people that want to protect, the environmental integrity of what we have here. We have people that are concerned about fiscal responsibility and fiscal sustainability. We've got seasonal residents. We have permanent residents. We have small business owners. We have commercial corridors. We have things like the airport. So we need to be able to discuss those things through the interconnectivity of all those issues. We can talk about single focus viewpoints on those things, but we have to recognize that the single viewpoint perspective has to be put in context with the broader outcome, and we need to do that through an even, shared, inclusive platform of mutual respect. And I think we have some really good ideas about how to do that. Quality of life. So as a mission statement, New Smyrna Beach will preserve and enhance the shared quality of life across the spectrum of physical, environmental, economic, and social cultural aspects of the community. So I think what that means is, first of all, quality of life is a hard thing to put your finger on, what makes something special. But the community consistently, if we get to some discussion, the community consistently refers to charm and character, and these characters are defined in different ways depending on who you're talking to, but it typically has to do with parks and environmental access, access to this wonderful set of environmental amenities that we have. The scale and style of our historic buildings, having lively main streets that are locally owned and authentic, having walkable streets that aren't overrun by cars, where pedestrians, have equal place with the automobile, that we have community facilities that are available for local use, and that we have friendly personal interactions and social fabric and community events where we can have that social connectivity with our neighbors. That's really what makes New Smyrna kind of what it is. So the quality of life thing really is connected to the communication thing, because we've got a lot of fabric here, physical fabric, that's delicate and special, and we need to be able to talk about it and how to find the right balance of preserving those things that make New Smyrna Beach special while we're doing constructive conversation. Environment and resiliency. We talked about New Smyrna Beach being resilient to climate change, sea level rise, and other environmental factors to both protect the urban lands and the natural ecosystems. And for discussion, this really comes down to thinking about tidal impacts, storm surge, floodplain protection, stormwater management, and water quality, as well as native ecosystems and species habitat. That we must have solutions that work with nature in the sense that natural systems both buffer the impacts of storm surge, but they also provide environmental system continuity in terms of stormwater percolation, aquifer recharge, water quality, protection against erosion. We need to consider existing development and future development. We need to consider emergency preparedness. And we need to think about funding, because right now rates are low. Some of the things we're talking about may be expensive, and we need to really have a fiscal plan over time. And I know that right now, with the COVID impacts and the kind of financial impacts that those are having on local government, it's hard to think about that right at the moment, maybe, in terms of fiscal year 2021. But if we really look through a 5-year lens, a 10-year lens, we need to be thinking long-term how to position ourselves financially to do some of the physical things that we want to do to protect the integrity of our environment. And then finally, transportation and circulation. We must move towards a more balanced, livable, and multimodal system for transportation so that New Smyrna Beach is safer and it remains friendly or becomes more friendly for pedestrians. And I think pedestrians is sort of a euphemism for human scale, human mobility. If that means bicycles, if it means scooters, if it means golf carts or other small ways of getting around, that we don't just let ourselves become by default a high-speed automobile town. We need to accommodate the automobile, but we've got to put human mobility on an equal par with automobile mobility, even if that means that there's a little bit of delay in automobile efficiency. If our goal here is automobile efficiency and to let people get from point A to point B as quickly and frictionlessly as possible, we can achieve that. The result will be that humans cannot navigate New Smyrna Beach unless they're in an automobile. And I think that's not the outcome that we want. We want a place that's wholly inclusive of really human-scaled, human-centered circulation. So again, this requires balance. It requires a balanced view of the world that has to happen through an inclusive communication platform that recognizes multiple perspectives. So what we've done, and where I'm going to pass this off in a few minutes here to Michelle, is I mentioned that there's a lot of drill down, and you can see the drill down, sort of the starter ideas and actions that are tied to each of these strategic headlines. And the goal is really, how do you start to create a series of initiatives where you can continue talking strategically, and I think our session together was extremely productive. I think everyone felt like, wow, we should have more of these. It felt like a great session in December, and it felt like we need to get to some things that are not only actionable, but things that are measurable and monitorable over time. You know, how many of our historic resources are we protecting? How much acreage or what service delivery do we have of certain environmental or open space assets? How are we doing on economic development or basic government services? And can we measure that and benchmark that over time? And how do you keep track of all that? So what Michelle and Brian and Khalid and the rest of the team did was to really take, and I'm gonna show the group here, and you can see on the screen, was to really take the 5 strategic elements that we have and take the starter ideas and categorize them and create a tracking system where every single starter idea is now organized by strategic element. And it's also got some intelligence built into it as to whether or not this is a technological delivery thing. Is this something that we need to do administratively? Tool that you can track online, and it can be available for the community to see in real time. You can update it in real time. You can add to it in real time. And you can start to address some of these things head on. So I think this really gets to what I know the mayor and others on the commission really wanted, which is something that you can track, something with some metrics, and something with some transparency that collectively the community can look at, and you can see how you're doing and where you're making progress. So with that, I want to turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Pete.
Great. Sorry, it's my first time speaking with a mask on. So if you can't hear me, tell me. So Pete kind of already did the highlight there with just the software. It's an online tool. I have the free version, so no cost to the city for this one-time user platform that we're showing you. The tool is generally a mind map, if you will. A lot of folks may have used that in their time, but it just takes thoughts, organizes them, and you can set them up in any format you'd like. But the cool thing about it is it harvests the data. And I say that meaning our last strategic planning tool was a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, which is very cumbersome, very data heavy, manual entry. This tool allows us to enter it once and then turn it into a timeline. Once we assign, it becomes a real project schedule. Once we identify who the staff person is, what the target date would be for the delivery or completion of that item. So we really could, once we get past our meeting with you all today and lock in on the actual content, go ahead and assign dates to each task and report back to you all on when we think this will be completed. It allows you to organize, again, by whether or not the item needs action, it's in progress, it's not started, and that's all blank there for now just because we haven't, again, put a status to the item. We're just at the content level. So just real quick back to the map itself. I kind of rolled it all up there for you just to kind of simplify and show you like the surprise moments when we open them up. But going into communication and trust, we'll just, if you'd like, Khalid, do you want me to go hit them all, go down one by one? Okay, sure. So the first item up, again, under communication and trust, is having more commission workshop sessions about the strategic topics. So again, stop me, I guess, if we get to an item that we should comment on. But format-wise, again, Pete mentioned there's these color codings that we've assigned to these that say whether it's an administrative task or a social task. And we did that just so, because we can filter this list. We can come over here and open a category item and say, show me everything in our strategic plan. We can filter by date, end date, by person, or these tags. So I can say, show me everything that's just administrative. And if I had everything open, you know, it would let me show you everything. I think you can kind of follow the logic there. We can set priorities to these things. We can say, you know, one item's a bit more critical to address than the other. So I think you can kind of get the gist there on the technology. We can add any kind of tag you'd like. You can see we're only using technology, administrative, social, and construction. We've got two more, or I think you can even put more colors to say if there's something specific you as the commission would like us to filter on and come back and show you just a printout of that item, we certainly can. So back to communication and trust. The second item we've already, I'd say, are pretty proud of is updating our city website. Phil Vesky's worked really hard on that. I've heard a lot of good feedback there, and we'll continue to do that. That'll be an ongoing item that we deal with daily, monthly, yearly. That, again, was a technology item, and it will continue to be as it relates to some of these other items in our list as far as putting a story map or updating capital projects. Our website is very, very important for communication. We'd like to develop a community survey for benchmarking and having a starting point to measure ourselves against. We need to facilitate stronger engagement and participation in the West Side neighborhood for more community involvement. Similarly, facilitate constructive public involvement regarding development west of I-95 and balancing the community issues in that section of our city limits. We'd also like to provide, which we actually are doing at the moment, more options for virtual town halls and commission meetings via social media and live streaming. Again, that made it on the list prior to our COVID situation, but we're getting better as we go forward. An interactive city map, again, a story map of current private and public development, something that folks can go online, a tool that they can be resourceful on their own with, that's live and updated and puts, again, current information out there. We'd like to measure and document social media and community participation. So who's looking at the information that's out there? How much response are we getting? What's not out there that we aren't showing? Definitely getting some data, which we have confirmed is some low-hanging fruit that we could start very soon. And then last two, promote diversity participation. We need, to ensure all demographics are at public events. And then maintain and build the email database. So anytime we've had someone at an event sign up for a class, et cetera, we are collecting emails, and we need to continue to grow that repository. And when a notice goes out, everyone that we have an email address for should be getting that information. Any comments on communication and trust as far as strategic measurable actions that we can take on?
Vice Mayor.
It's very nice to develop the timeline and everything. Is there a way, just taking an example, West Side neighborhood involvement? I assume you would list any meetings we had, any progress we take. Would there be a way to input the public's input?
To this tool? To this tool itself?
To the tool itself, yes. In other words, you have a meeting and 20 people show up and it would say which way they were going and their thoughts on it.
So there is, in the tool itself, when I click into that item, you can add attachments. So there's a file repository that comes with our tool. So right here is where that could exist. Again, I'm learning this just like most folks, but I would think that could be a place where we could hold that. It's very, it's very much like Facebook or those other social media apps where you can write notes to each other and we can, track a conversation even inside the tool.
I think you can attach a report to it.
Right, so I would imagine under each of these tasks is where we're attaching those sign-in sheets or data-driven documents to kind of, capture all of the information about the item.
I think anything that's like a presentation or a document or a follow-up meeting notes summary type of thing that may get written to document an event that took place can get attached.
Right, but what I'm wondering is if you, let's say, have 3 successive meetings on a particular subject and you gather the results from the community, is there anything in the program that can cumulatively add that data together?
That would likely be a manual analysis that we
you
at
might
the
do
staff
that
level.
another way and then file the product
Right.
in this.
Exactly.
And you'd have to go out of the program to get the results back.
It's like you have a file and you have sub-files. So you have the sub-files for the 3 meetings, but in order to do the survey for the 3 of them, then it has to be done manually.
And I think we're I mean, this is a new tool. I think we'll have to try to figure, I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. We'll have to figure some of that out. I've got some questions as well as far as read-only access versus read-write and all those things. But we'll figure some of those out. And some of those data points are just hard to capture. I mean, you talk about the data, but it's like, what data point are you actually capturing? Which is the next thing she's going to talk about, hopefully, under quality of life and the metrics. But any other questions on communication and trust item? So, Michelle, just for sake of time, I want to make sure we get through all these and give the commission a chance to comment. So maybe just kind of hit the highlights on on each of them, and then because we've had this, we saw this on our agenda.
Yeah,
So
make sure everybody read it. Again, so I like that idea. The quality of life, again, Pete's already mentioned it's a tough one to measure. We already have data on city services and performances with police and fire, traffic data. We just want to build upon that, make it a bit, out there for communication and publishing that information. But the tougher one, I'd say, is developing a metric to measure quality of life and the character factors. Again, Pete and his team helped us, grapple with that, and maybe some items that are measured are how many historic buildings do we have, how many of them are on the National Register, what's the tree canopy coverage, again, how much park acreage. Again, it goes back to the park and the environment and the outdoor, and it is really linked, over to the fourth category of environment. But measuring those factors is a hefty task. I think, in my mind, this is probably one of the more challenging ones. And then the next few down, just setting up, again, strategic working groups, a long-range plan for the AOB site. We all love to continue to swirl on. Develop programs for business and work where I live programs, long-range plan for conservation lands. Brian and his team have been tackling that one over the last year and a half, 2 years. And then, again, the I-95 Western neighborhoods, as far as bringing additional community services to those neighborhoods. Any questions or comments on quality of life measures?
any comments from the commission? Seeing none, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. Growth management, you'll see that these next three categories are very heavy administrative. The green dot, there's not a lot of, I guess technology could roll in there and social, but again, just something to note there. State Road 44 corridor plan, LDR, updating the LDR zoning codes for several issues listed there below, 1 through 5, all about buildings, form, commercial design, open space requirements, developing a working group for attainable housing, again, Western growth, proactively managing that through comprehensive planning and partnerships between owners and city, as well as other agencies. And then the last one there is engaging the UC in greater collaboration with their initiatives as well as our own. Anything on growth management that feels like it may be missing, needs to be added? Any questions?
Hearing none, go ahead.
Okay. Environment and resiliency, again, building again on the coastal flood areas, looking at the base flood elevation projection data, as well as stormwater storage for flood-prone areas that have less risk of long-term inundation, and then focusing work on inboard areas with highest probability for flooding and prolonged inundation. Exploring opportunities for enhanced stormwater treatment and best management practices, as well as best management program for low-impact development, rain gardens, native plants, and other techniques to address our water quality and stormwater issues. We also would like to update the stormwater master plan for regional stormwater management facilities. And then lastly, promote a culture of environmental sustainability in NSB. Anything on environment and resiliency? Again, it's mostly, as we've mentioned, is flood-based and stormwater.
Okay, go ahead.
And then in conclusion, transportation circulation. Again, we talked a lot about roadway character and livability with Pete just mentioning where we need to go as a city and making that determination. Is it getting from point A to point B, or is it more at the pedestrian level, and is there something in between? So diving into each of those individually and measuring congestion, exploring traffic calming opportunities, local network and street connectivity to help that mobility issue. And then the last two categories that you can't see right there, parking solutions. We did a lot of work with the Flagler Avenue area here early this year, and had some good output from that. I think we can continue to build upon that, as well as, the multimodal mobility with a shuttle service and or ride share opportunity.
Okay,
So happy to answer any questions.
go ahead, Commissioner.
So if we put timelines on these, will it also like trigger a reminder that something's coming due, something's?
It should, yes. It's got
Okay.
a notifications feature in the top right corner.
Uh-huh.
So, it's tracking everything I've done inside the tool, and if I assign if something gets assigned to Brian or Khalid, it would have a date, and as long as their notifications were turned on, they would continue to get those reminders.
And you can filter based on due
Your-
date.
Right,
overdue, all
and by
that.
your
Sure, yeah.
items, correct.
So, Michelle, a couple of questions while the rest of the commission. I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, no, thanks.
I saw some of the it looked like maybe in the filtering, but there was impact difficulty.
Here we go.
Yeah, wherever that
Yep.
was, the tags that we could provide.
Yep, you can. do all
I think that
sorts
would
of-
be really helpful to apply to these given more time, because that helps you kind of rack and stack these to figure out ones that are
Okay.
obviously high impact, low
Yep.
difficulty. You start there.
Yep.
Hopefully, there's another way we can tag with just dollar amount, because maybe it's
Yeah.
easy and high impact, but $10 million, and so that's, you got to be able to integrate that into the racking and stacking. And then the last so I think you've captured everything here that we talked about, that I recall, at least you got my items, I'll put it that way, that we talked about at the workshop. So I'm happy with what's presented. I love that we're using technology to help us track this. We're out of Excel, that we can even have some transparency to this. I think we'll have to figure out, can we get I love the public being able to have full transparency into it. I think, opening it up, if the public can go in here and just any random person on the internet can change this, then that's going to be an issue, because how
Right.
do you track, like, all right, now it's, they deleted an item or something.
Agreed.
So we got to figure out a read-only type version of this, hopefully.
Yep.
But I'm sure you all will figure that out. And if nothing else, we can just publish this at periodic intervals or something. But I love that feature. The last thing I'd say, though, on a couple of these, I keep challenging us to, continually ask ourselves a question of, how do we measure and how do we know when we're finished? So some of these are just kind of open-ended, that we should absolutely do something. I'll give you an example under environment and resiliency. Promote a culture of environmental sustainability in New Smyrna Beach. So I'd rather see that tightened up to say, run a 3-month campaign promoting this, and then we can check the box and say we did this. And so maybe that is a goal, continually each year, but there's some action item, because otherwise I don't know when I'm finished with, that's just going to be there forever.
Let me speak to that for a second. So I think that the purpose of this, I think, was really to establish the game board of issues that
Yeah.
really rise to the top, and set a strategy or a platform whereby you can dive into these boxes and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Because you could take just about any of these green boxes, and you could say, so facilitate stronger engagement and participation in West Side neighborhood involvement. Okay, well, what does that mean?
That was another one I had circled.
I think what it says, and I think one of the things that kind of came out of the discussion before was, okay, wow, we've had this really great positive conversation. Maybe we, either at a staff level or at a commission level or both, we should have, we should take some of these topics kind of one at a time, and let's drill down.
Yeah.
And let's really say, let's do this. Let's not worry about this.
Yeah.
Mayor, if I
and
may
develop
just to
that action
elaborate
list.
on this before you move on to the next question. The idea is, if the commission approves the concept of this, to move into the action plan, and the action plan will actually look at
Yeah.
each item, in terms of how we're going to do it, the cost, and the impact.
Yeah.
So that will become a next, as soon as you approve this, that will be our next step.
Okay.
And that's quite frankly what happened last year, and that's why the tool became such this heavy document, because we'd have this high level goal like this, and once you really go to the action state, there's a lot of steps to achieve that one thing, and then it became this, it's a tough balance.
And that's where that impact, difficulty, and dollar tag has to come into play, because look, let's face it, this is great, and if we checked every box on this list, we're done. Like, we can fold up the government. Like we're finished, So this is going to be something that's going to be talked about, and for 10 more generations. Probably some of these items will never be finished with promoting a culture of environmental sustainability. So let's pick the one item we can check off and feel good about that we've accomplished for this short term that we're in charge of this. So yeah,
I think it's a living. I mean, I think the idea here was to really suss out what those kind of really special, intangible topics are.
Yeah.
That are really strategic to the ethos of New Smyrna, above the altitude of day-to-day government, that you can really track and work on over a period of time. And that's where I think this is a living document. I think you create things to do, you knock them out. A little while later, you create new things to do. Transportation's not going away. Environment's not going away. Community communication's not going away.
I don't want to have, I think the saying somebody said one time, if you've got 60 priorities, you have no priorities. Like, I don't want to have so much that you look at the to-do list and you got to go, where do I even begin? Like, I want to make sure on each of these we've kind of got, all right, here's the next step, and that's an achievable step. We can do that. And the one I really love is of course, the metrics under that quality of life, because I think that informs and infuses throughout all of these others if we start codifying some of those metrics. So, all right, I've said a lot. Other comments on this item?
Well, I'd just like to say, I think hearing city manager and hearing you, I think we're on the same page. I like this. I think it's good. This is a great strategic plan, the way it's been set up. I'm excited about that. So I'd like to move forward on the action plan. I think it's time.
Okay. Commissioner Sachs, I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, question for Michelle. Have you had a chance to look at the new preamble for our charter? It has very lofty goals, similar to what is on our strategic plan. And I wonder, we do have a lot of these nice things we'd like to work on, but then there's the daily running of the city, the keeping up of the maintenance, and then there's the loftier goals of environment and new transportation measures we'll have to take. So my point is, how much of this can we actually start to do?
I'd have to look at the team for that one.
Kelly, do you want to? Brian?
We're making commitments
Well,
at that point.
that's what the mayor was talking about, and I was talking about the action plan. So our job is now, when the commission is give us the blessing on this concept, that we come back to you with an action plan, but set it on a priority and give it a cost, because obviously this goes with funding, and it's these items. Some of them are, it's a high dollar mark. Mm-hmm. So we'll come back with the priority, and then from there we'll get the commission blessing on to say, we want you to start on these priorities, and then we could go from there. But as a document, that's why the strategic plan is updated every 5 to 10 years, for that purpose. Because some of these items are it's living forever, but it just some new techniques comes into it. So
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thanks, Michelle.
Well, basically, we have two things in front of us. One's the actual plan itself, laid out in the 5 separate categories. I think that's great. I like the way that lays out, and I fully approve of the action plan. The second half is the part that Michelle addressed, which is how do we know if we're really doing it? And what this plan appears to be is a more of a record-keeping type of function to show us what we've done. But I think we have to get a plan that adds to it the things the mayor was speaking of. How much are these things going to cost? When are they going to take place? And what is the results of the community input? We have 3 meetings, as I started to say before. If you have 3 meetings on any one of the topics in a row, I would like a way for the plan to categorize how the people feel, whether they're for it, whether they're against it, break it down even a little farther, and be able to have the plan, the program, do the work of bringing all those items together so we can track which way we're going. Because right now, we're record keeping. but we're still doing the follow-up work to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Right.
So I would like that added to the tool. I know you came up with one. Great. Better than I could have done. But I would like to look a little farther into that before we approve any particular method of tabulating and tracking what we're doing. Plan itself, I fully approve that.
So just so I'm clear on that, so you're trying to break it into two items, the tool that's been presented and then the actual kind of plan, and you're saying you like the plan but want more information on the tool, is that what I heard?
Correct. I think if we had a more inclusive tool, then we would cut down on how much manual entering we have to do.
Okay.
Let's say we have a community meeting like we had down in the Coronado Center,
Yeah,
which was electronically
yeah,
calculated and put in. If we had that data, we could put that in this plan. We could have another one. We could see how the results are going. And
Yeah.
it'll give us a little more guidance.
and I think this, I mean, so the survey, really the only data point you can create if you run a public meeting would be some kind of a survey. You take the temperature of this room and you say, I just collected 50 data points and here was the survey, kind of like we did on the parking thing. And I don't know of a tool, maybe it may exist, but I don't know of a tool that's both a survey and a this. I think at best we can use the survey technology. You can capture that. You can get the output of that, and so we could attach that as a file, is my understanding, attach that as a file to one of these, so we could be able to track that over time. Say, hey, this particular item, we were at polling at this percent, now we're at this percent. And then one of these items, this community survey for benchmarking, on the third one under communication and trust, I think things that could be attached here. So yeah, I worry about, I support this tool. I worry about trying to have, there's the I forget the guy's name, something law of software that says every software tries to evolve to the point it can send email, and at that point it's just so cumbersome nobody can use it. And so
Right.
I feel like, I don't know, I haven't researched this, so I'm deferring to staff. If this is what you found, it looks like a lot of time invested in it, I support.
You all understand it well as I'm hearing it, that this is kind of a data collection, it's a report, it's kind of the front face of the bigger plan, but the drilling down the data side, I think once we get to the next step that Carl had mentioned after today, we really need to find, of these 30 items that you see on the screen, 10 of them are really data points. The rest are more, or they're ongoing collection pieces. They're more statistically driven than just completing one or two steps. Some are more difficult than others. And I think once we realize how many of those we have, then we can find a data tool
Yeah.
that solves what you're asking. I think we need to see how much we have of that
I
first.
think there's, and let me just jump into it. I think there's two different types of data. There's what I would call sort of anecdotal community perception data.
Yep.
And then there is quantitative event data. So let me explain. So we talked last time about whether or not it would be worth your while to do what we call a statistically valid survey that's not just, who showed up at the community meeting that night and what did that cohort of people have to say. I mean, you can actually go and do a statistically valid survey that quantitatively, as a science, touches at the right level of depth all the cohorts of your community and can measure how you're performing as a local government, for instance, these metrics for essential services. It could also measure community perspective or community perception of some quality of life factors that you want to keep track of and say, well, people don't feel like there's enough of this, or people feel like there's too much of that. And then you can take measures, and then you can come back in a couple years, redo the survey, and see if you've moved the needle. Now, that's qualitative stuff. There's also, I think, some quantitative, there's bricks and mortar types of things you can do. I mean, we can look at, for instance, you're either going to do a plan for the 44 corridor or you're not. You're either going to update your land development regs for the west side or you're not. You can look at things like roadway character and what the characteristics are of a livable street, and you can see how you're doing and whether you've installed, 4 projects that make something more walkable or you haven't. So I think breaking down how you want to measure some of these things, I think is a nuance, and it's an important thought process that you go through, because there's different ways of approaching the problem. But I think what this says, which goes back to the top of the assignment, is we're going to look at these things, we're going to categorize them, and we're going to start keeping track.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real value in what this is as a document.
I don't dispute that.
Yeah.
But what I would like to have is a program that could take the in-depth studies and put that data into this. So
Sure. Yeah.
that could be the next step. This
Yeah.
could be a starting point. But basically, it'll show us if we've forgotten anything.
Yeah.
If for no other reason. So.
Okay. So, Kyle, do you need from the commission motion to basically approve? And I'm going to just suggest that I think the technology that staff is trying to use is, I think the fact that we're trying to make that leap out of Excel and using technology is good. And unless someone has specific things they want to recommend and, that they've used before, that they're familiar with, I have nothing to add to this. So if this is what staff has brought to us from a technology standpoint, I'm happy to, I'll let you guys figure out that.
That's why
So,
these items, if you look at the colors on your 11 by 17, and we kind of took it as technology, administrative, social, and construction.
Yeah.
So when we do the action plan, those items that they need to be having the survey and having what the Vice Mayor talking
Yeah.
about, I probably will be incorporated into
You'll
something
need more
different.
technology, yeah.
So,
Yeah. So you need this is a workshop, right? Yeah. So you've got the feedback you need from the commission. Any feedback? Anybody have anything else to share with staff? Commissioner
I
Arman,
much
go ahead.
prefer this than this spreadsheet, because that just got lost all the time. So at least, if I have an issue or something I want to focus on, I can see where it is and how it's being processed through the whole system, and what, may be needed or what I may need to do to interact with that to try to facilitate that. So.
Yeah, and again, being able to, I'd love it if we can create somehow a read-only version of this that is just, there's a link to it on the website, and here you go. This is it. You can drill in. You can see any staff notes or comments, and so, yeah.
So my only other question is it doable in this year's budget?
Is it what?
Is it doable in this year's budget?
This software.
Some items we're already working on anyway. So if you look at
I mean, the
this
software, the program.
Oh, the software.
It looked really.
It's free for one user, but once you start adding, that's when we need to decide how many people we want to have it.
All the pricing was in pounds, which was weird. Is this a UK software?
It defaults to the pound,
defaults to
but you have
okay.
to pick dollars.
The
yeah.
pricing, I jumped ahead. The pricing looks pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's $250 or less.
I can click to that tab
Yeah.
if you'd like to literally look at it.
Yeah, no, we'll let you guys figure it out. But this isn't a multi-$1,000 investment.
Okay.
This
Right,
is,
that was the
Yeah,
intent.
that's-
yeah,
to
this
not
is
blow the
this is in the
bank.
hundreds.
I don't want to do this and say, oh, there's a budget issu. and
No,
So
no.
if we're,
This is,
It should be.
it gets
what
pushed
is.
down, kicked down the road a little bit. I
No.
want to
Any
see some
other-
action.
Commissioner Sachs?
Yeah, just a quick one. I'm looking at the pie charts, and they're easier to understand than graphs, and we had a lot of resident input. And so, let's just take infrastructure. 25% of the dollars is what our residents would like us to spend. Is this meant to be used as a quantitative measure of how we want to allot our monies going forward? We're actually doing some of these things, thankfully,
Right.
as a city. It almost seems like a 101 guide to how to run a city well. So I wondered, do we start with infrastructure, or do we work on each portion of the pie simultaneously?
I think that from my perspective, I think that I go back to the beginning of this. I think we tried to ask some fairly similar questions to different cohorts of people in different ways, and you get some feedback. And I think if you squint too hard and try to take any individual piece of that feedback too seriously, you're beyond the level of accuracy of the work that we did. So, these pie charts represent, 60 to 70 people who showed up in 2 nights at a public meeting. That's what this is. So you sort of take that as a set of inputs, and then you say, okay, well, what were the inputs that we got from staff? What were the inputs that we got from the commission? What were, so I think what we're trying to say here on this spread between page 2 and page 3, and then into page 4 and page 5, which even includes the statements from the Residents Coalition. I think we're trying to say that there's several points of input, and they seem to align over these issues. And when they align over these issues, when you really boil down to what people are talking about, they're talking about the things on that list. And so that's your action plan. I think backing up a step and saying, okay, well, we've got a pie chart here that says that we should spend 9% of our money on this thing and 12% of our money on that. I think you're applying a level of precision to something that's beyond the accuracy of what the exercise was. I think that so there's a difference between accuracy and precision. I think from an accuracy point of view, these 5 topics and the bullet points that are underneath them as things for the community to develop a game plan on, I believe this is highly accurate. I think the individual precision of each little piece of input, how many decimal points are you precise? It's not that precise of a study. But I think the document does faithfully represent the top line items and the big subjects under each of those items to guide your future, action plan. Does that make sense?
Yes, Pete.
And I'm saying that partially to you, but I'm also saying it to the public or anyone that might be reading, seeing this online, is to sort of take each of these input things for what they are. It's a snapshot, and each individual snapshot only has a certain amount of statistical relevance. But when you stack them all on top of each other, you start to see the patterns. And the patterns are what's on the back. The patterns is this table and the initiatives that are listed on this table by Michelle.
Pete, I have one more concern and question. Now we're in these strange times of COVID, which may affect our budgets.
For sure.
How do we reckon for that in light of a strategic plan to make a better city?
Yeah, sure. So I always speak totally anecdotally, and now it's going to get really anecdotal because one person's crystal ball is as good as another. Everybody in the industry is talking about this. Everybody who runs a small business is talking about this. The best sort of thought that I can maybe share, again, to you and to the community about maybe how to think about this, and this is some personal perspective mixed with maybe some perspective of the economists and people that are within our studio, because we've talked about this. When we had the recession in 2000, which really started in 2008, and the initial Lehman Brothers crash, which led to a whole series. What happened in the Great Recession, in my mind, was the result of some deeply rooted structural problems in the banking and lending industry that went across the country and essentially turned everything upside down. I mean, all sorts of economic factors within the country were completely upside down for, essentially, it took us about 4 years to pull out of that. And I do not in any way discount the financial impacts that are happening right now to local governments and to individuals with their loss of jobs, loss of income, loss of business. I believe that this is an event. The event will have some consequences. The consequences will take a certain period of time to work out of, but I believe that at some point there is going to be an immunization, whether it's a year or 18 months or whatever it is, but there will be a medical treatment to this. We will work our way out of this. And I see, and if you think about sort of that 2009 time period, it just seemed like, if you look at where tax revenues were, where land values were, what was happening to businesses and everything else, it's like, how will we ever get out of this downward spiral? There's no way out. And somehow in 2014, everybody was blasting off, ready to go. So I think that that the only perspective that I would share is that in my mind, I do believe this is an event. I think it's going to have an impact in 2021. I think there will continue to be lingering impacts into 2022. But I think when you think about sort of a 5-year term, I see this as more of an event rather than a complete structural, decomposition of the financial institutions of the country, which is what the Great Recession was. So I'm hopeful that we can sort of limp along, try to carry people with us as we go, keep our communities together, keep our services together, keep our neighbors together as they manage this, and we will work our way out of this. There will be an immunization at some point in the future, and this isn't going to be a 5-year, just disaster like what we had before.
And I think it's good insight, and that's what I'm hearing as well. And I think that's where I'm glad we're doing this ahead of the budget, and then as staff is able to assign those dollars next to some of these, I mean, it becomes just like in our own personal budgets, and you figure out, all right, here's the cost of these items, and how many of them can we tackle in this year's budget, and how do we pick those? We pick it based on it, the impact and the priority. So I think that's how we'll get there. So, all right. Pete, thank you very much. Good work by you and your team.
Yeah, I
It's
love
been,
working with you folks.
yeah, it's been good to work with you. Thank
I'll
you.
be here just a few weeks for vacation, so.
Okay.
I'll
All
be
right.
on the river in a kayak.
All right. Please park legally. Because we're raising the fines tonight. All right. Thank you, Michelle and staff, for excellent work by all. So, adjourned. We'll see you all at the next meeting at 6:30.